Francis wasted no time diving into controversial political issues, opening his visit to the U.S. with a strong call for action to combat climate change. It was a message sure to please the Obama White House and liberals in general, but the Pope had something for conservatives too, with a pointed call to protect religious liberties. Francis will deliver his first papal address to the Republican majority Congress on Thursday.
In a matter of hours, Pope Francis will land here in the U.S. The Pope recently took off from Santiago, Cuba, and is scheduled to land at Joint Base Andrews at 4 p.m. Eastern. Pope Francis even carried some of his own luggage as he boarded the plane. There you see him holding his luggage there in his hands. He'll be greeted in Washington by President Obama and the First Lady when his plane touches down. And when he gets there, the Pope will spend 2 days in the nation's capital before visiting New York Thursday and Philadelphia on Saturday. Chip Reed joins us now with more on the Pope's historic visit. Hi, Chip.
Well, hi, Vlad. Well, behind me is the Apostolic Nunciature. That is basically the Vatican Embassy in Washington, D.C. That is where he will be staying the 2 nights he's in Washington, D.C. Now, one piece of good news for him, we've been told that the first level is very elegant, but the upper levels where he'll be staying a bit more modest, and of course that's what he likes. He is a man of very simple taste. Let me show you over here what's going on. You've got Secret Service agents getting ready for their duties later today. You also have Jersey barriers. They're putting a Jersey wall all the way up the middle of Massachusetts Avenue. On this side will be the restricted area. The other side, behind another fence over there, is where people will be able to come here and hopefully get a peek at the Pope. Now, I tell you, he is 78 years old, but you would never know it. He has boundless energy. His schedule is packed. Tomorrow morning, first, he meets with President Obama at the White House. Then he speaks in English, not his native language, but in English to about 15 or 20,000 people on the White House lawn. So another highlight, with lots of other activities in between, is that he'll go to the Basilica of the National Shrine, where he will do a mass in Spanish to about 25,000 people. And then on Thursday is that big speech to Congress where he'll talk about some controversial issues ranging from abortion to immigration. Some issues he's in line with Democrats, some in line with Republicans. And one of the big questions is whether people are going to clap, and if it's going to be like the State of the Union, where you have the Democrats applauding some things like immigration and global warming, and Republicans applauding other things like abortion and traditional families. Vlad?
Yeah, it should be very fascinating, Chip. In fact, after he delivers that address to Congress, he's going to get on a plane and come here to New York City and then deliver Mass at St. Patrick's Cathedral. So what is the security like where you are, Chip?
Well, right now it's hard to tell. It's kind of guys all milling around, but I can tell you, there are a lot of people here. It's a lot of security, fences everywhere, and of course, as we're always told, there's a lot of security we don't see. So take whatever you see and double or triple it. I now see a number of Secret Service agents coming over here with German Shepherds and Belgian Malinois. So the canine patrols are on duty too. And I also saw some police officers on horseback. Vlad?
Chip, I gotta ask you before I let you go, what is the White House hoping to gain from Pope Francis' visit? The Pope certainly aligns with President Obama on some issues, for example, climate change. On others, there are some divisive issues that are facing not just Catholics, but all Americans here. What is the White House hoping to get?
Well, I think the White House and Democrats generally are hoping that he does make a big deal out of immigration and climate change. I mean, everybody knows where the Pope and all popes in history have stood on abortion and traditional families. So they don't expect to make any have him say anything different there. But it was surprising to a lot of people how strong a position he took on climate change and on immigration and on opening up Cuba. And so certainly they would love to hear him say things that would support their position and perhaps convince some Americans to agree with them.
Chip Reed, thank you so much, Chip. We appreciate it.
From the campus of Catholic University of America, behind me, the Basilica of the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception, where Pope Francis will celebrate Mass tomorrow. The Pope's historic first ever journey to America began late this afternoon. Welcome to Washington, plainside, by President Obama and a cheering crowd following his 3-day trip to Cuba. For American Catholics, the next 6 days offer a chance to see and touch a leader who is inspired with his humbleness, compassion, and mercy. But his outspokenness on matters of world affairs ensures his visit will also be seen through a political lens. We begin our coverage with NBC News national correspondent Peter Alexander. Quite a welcome today, Peter.
Lester, that's exactly right. This really is a historic trip. Pope Francis is now in for the night, but his arrival has already energized so many Americans, including more than 70 million American Catholics. His Holiness today made history, touching down outside Washington, Francis's first visit to the U.S. The Pope welcomed by President Obama and the First Lady at Joint Base Andrews, a gesture so rare this president's only done it once before. The Holy Father also showing special affection for school children. He then left Andrews in an Italian-made Fiat, dwarfed by the American SUVs carrying his Secret Service detail. Earlier, en route from Cuba, aboard a jet dubbed Shepherd 1. Francis told reporters that he would not bring up the issue of the U.S. embargo on Cuba, saying this is a pastoral trip, not a political one. In Cuba, a remarkable reception, with the Pope calling for a revolution of tenderness. Today, thousands lined the street to greet Francis as he made a surprise trip in the Pope-mobile to meet with families at the Cathedral de Santiago, embracing and taking photos with some of his youngest hosts. Even President Raul Castro seemed impressed, meeting privately with Francis today for a third time. The 78-year-old pontiff carrying his own briefcase as he boarded the flight to the U.S. Awaiting him in Washington, a city known for tight security, police everywhere, closing streets, putting up barricades, and everywhere excitement.
There it is, going by, and there's the Pope.
We're really focusing on the message of love and mercy and the joy that he brings to all of us here.
Francis will visit with the president at the White House tomorrow, on Thursday becoming the first pope to address a joint meeting of Congress. Speaker Boehner today tweeting the view Francis will see while visiting the Capitol. While here, Francis will also parade along the National Mall and celebrate Mass at the largest Catholic church in the U.S. Tonight, Francis arrived at what's effectively the Vatican's embassy, located directly across the street from the Vice President's mansion. A humble man of faith, now at the center of American democracy. And in a city that's not known for its spirituality or reflection, what's really struck me is just how much Washington has embraced this historic visit. The Cardinal here told us that he received a call from a friend saying, please take care of our Pope. And Lester, that caller wasn't even Catholic.
Lots of excitement. We've been watching him all day preparing for the Mass here at the Basilica tomorrow. Peter,
I'm hoping it doesn't affect me. I'm about to go into the park for a run, and I think it's not closed off yet. But on Friday, I'll just avoid the park.
It's going to be really difficult for people that drive or commute to work with driving, so it's going to be really hard time.
I'm not concerned. I'm actually happy that the Pope is coming to visit our city. I think he's such an important personality in the world, and we welcome him.
And the little inconvenience is worth it.
Absolutely. I'm all for it.
better behaved when you're here.
What is the most important issue you'll discuss?
I was just commenting that I noticed all of you are much better behaved than usual.
I want to say something about the migrants.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, guys. All right, thank you, guys. Thank you.
Hundreds of bishops from across the U.S. gathered at Washington's Cathedral of St. Matthew the Apostle to bask in the presence of their Pope, but also to hear a gentle lecture. The pontiff acknowledged the difficulties church leaders have faced in dealing with the sex abuse scandal, but told them they must ensure it never happens again.
I know how much the wounds of these last few years have weighed on your spirit, and I have joined my efforts to yours in the efforts of succoring those victims. And when we bring succor, then the victims are healed, and we have to hope that such crimes will never repeat themselves.
He also urged them to do everything possible to help immigrants coming to the U.S. and gave them his personal thanks, not as the Pope, but as a pastor from Argentina.
You are now facing this long stream of Latin immigration, not only as the Bishop of Rome, but also as a pastor coming from the South. I feel the need to thank you. These people will enrich America and its church.
The bishops returned the affection, interrupting his speech with frequent applause and finishing with a standing ovation.
is CBSN. I am joined here on set by Contessa Brewer and Candida Moss, our papal contributor. Guys, the Pope is here.
It was really an amazing moment to see the pomp and circumstance greeting Pope Francis, and you heard Scott Pelley pointing out that this is a pontiff who prefers things to be simple and humble. In fact, where he's staying tonight at the Vatican Embassy in Washington, D.C., apparently his accommodations are very simple and straightforward, even though, as you might expect for any embassy in Washington, D.C., the main floor where official visits and events would happen is more formal.
Yeah, and I never expected to see or say the words bulletproof Fiat. I'm assuming that Fiat is bulletproof, but the Pope driving off, as Scott Pelley pointed out, in a very small, very simple Fiat 500, which is a tiny little car. Again, just going to this image that he has, this perception of being a very simple Pope.
And, you know, not just for the simplicity of it, but also for the ecological conservation of it as well. I mean, here's a Pope who has put out a position paper, essentially, on climate change, and he has been urging world leaders to address climate change and to do something to alter the advance of global warming and pollution. And so driving a car that gets far better gas mileage than a limousine would be a pretty significant symbolic step in what he's doing himself to address that.
I think that's exactly right. The Catholic Church is a church of symbolism and symbolic action, and the Pope leads by example and knows that people look to him as an example of how they should lead their lives. So if he wears Prada shoes, people won't take poverty seriously.
Yeah, and this is something that this Pope has done since the very beginning, right, Candida? Were you surprised when Pope Francis first appeared to the public and he was dressed in those very simple robes as opposed to the red and gold ecumenical robes that typically pontiffs appear in when they first win that conclave vote?
Yes, when Pope Francis was elected, we hadn't seen anything like it.
All right, so let's reintroduce ourselves. I am Vladimir Duthier. I'm joined by Contessa Brewer and Candida Moss, our papal contributor. We're going to go now to Alan Pizzi, who joins us on the phone. He was on that flight with Pope Francis to the United States from Santiago, Cuba. Alan, the Pope held a short press conference, some 26 minutes long. He answered 7 questions. Give us a gist of that.
Yes, he came back shortly after takeoff and stood up in front of us, and he takes questions spontaneously, I might say. There's no pre-arrangement at all. It's just we tell him who's going to ask, and they ask. The first question was about the embargo, and the Pope said he won't, with Cuba, the Pope said he won't be mentioning it in Congress. He said, quote, the problem of the embargo is part of the negotiations, and he made note that both President Obama and President Castro of Cuba have made that point. The Pope said, quote, my desire is that they end up with a good result, that they reach an accord which satisfies both sides. And he said reaching that kind of accord is in keeping with church social doctrine, and the church is against embargoes, per se. They don't like that idea at all. He was also asked about why he didn't meet with any dissidents, and he said, well, I met with quite a few people. They weren't, and I encountered people who weren't introduced to me, so I don't know if I didn't know if they were dissidents or not. He said he didn't snub anybody, because he said he turned down one-on-one requests completely blanket, and that he'd even turned down one from the president of Argentina who was visiting Cuba. So it was not a question of avoiding the dissidents. He said he just didn't, as far as he knew, come in contact with them. It was also asked about the fact that he appears to have spoken out very harshly against capitalism and capitalist excess, if you will. But he hasn't quite been so hard on the revolutionaries. And he said, no, criticism of capitalism does not make me a leftist. So that's a misinterpretation. He said everything that he has said is in keeping with church social doctrine. He's not pushing a political agenda there at all. But he's just, doing what he's supposed to do as Pope, what he believes in. He was also asked about why did he come to the United States by way of Cuba? He said, well, he had originally thought that he would like to enter the U.S. from Mexico like a migrant. But he said he could not go to Mexico without visiting the statue of the Virgin of Guadalupe, and that was because that would be a great insult to Mexicans. And if he added in that stop, logistics would have been almost undoable. And then he said, the embargo being dealt with the new accord between Cuba and the United States, he said, I'll go through Cuba, and that's exactly what he did. somebody asked him, well, what about, did you talk to Fidel Castro about his past repression of the church? And he said, no, that subject didn't come up. They talked about the things that interest them both, one of which is the environment, which he says Fidel Castro is very, very interested in. That climate change, that mankind's ravishing of the planet, that's very close to the Pope's heart. And it was a funny question was asked. He was asked about, how he reacted to a headline that basically said, is the Pope Catholic? And he said, laughed, and he said, well, I'll recite the catechism, I'll recite the creed if you want me to. And interestingly, you were talking earlier, I heard about the red shoes, and he said that a cardinal had told him that a very religious member of his congregation had come to him and said, look, is there such a thing as an anti-pope? And the cardinal said, well, why do you ask that question? And she said, well, I think there is, and I think that Francis is the anti-pope because he doesn't wear red shoes. So that caused considerable amusement on the part of Pope Francis, who he doesn't believe that he's either the anti-pope or not a Catholic. Generally, though, he looked pretty good. He rubbed his eyes and forehead a couple of times, looked a little tired, but he's very sprightly, and he grins a lot and laughs, and he warned us that we were in for a lot of hard work because it was going to be a tough three-city tour that he was looking forward to. And we asked him, would he give a reply in English, and he laughed, and he said, it's not my forte. He said that in Italian. He spoke at the press conference in Italian and Spanish, and we understand he's going to do some speeches in English here in the United States. He's been practicing. It is quite possible that he will speak in English in Congress. The UN speech will be in Spanish because that's his mother tongue, and it's an official language of the UN. And the beatification of Junipero Serra, the saint from California, the man he's making a saint, sorry, the canonization, the man he's making a saint from California, that will be in Spanish because he was a Spanish speaker and he's kind of a more Latino saint than anything else. So that's what he's planning to do.
Ellen, we're showing right now the video from on board the plane. This is the way the Pope talks to reporters when he's flying to come back to the press area and to talk to correspondents there where those questions are posed, and certainly he was very candid with the reporters there on board the plane. Thank you so much for doing such a thorough job of recounting the conversation. We appreciate that.
Let us pray. O God, who by your ineffable mercy have been pleased through the labors of your priest, Saint Junipero Serra, to count many American peoples within your church, grant by his intercession that we may so join our hearts to you in love as to carry always and everywhere before all people the image of your only begotten Son, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever.
Alégrense siempre en el Señor.
Rejoice in the Lord always. I shall say it again. Rejoice.
Una invitación
These are striking words which impact our lives.
alégrense.
Paul tells us to rejoice. He practically orders us to rejoice.
Una invitación
This
que se
command
hace eco
resonates with the desire
que todos
we all have
experimentamos
for a
de una
fulfilling
vida
life,
plena. Una vida
a meaningful life,
una vida
a joyful life.
Es como si
It
Pablo
is as if Paul could
tuviera
hear
la
what each
capacidad
one of us
de
is thinking
escuchar cada uno de
in
nuestros
his or
corazones
her heart
y pusiera voz
and to
a lo que
voice
sentimos
what we are feeling what we are experiencing. Something deep within us invites us to rejoice and tells us not to settle for placebos, which simply keep us comfortable. At the same time, though, we all know the struggles of everyday life. So much seems to stand in the way of this invitation to rejoice. Our daily routine can often lead us to a kind of glum apathy, which gradually becomes a habit with a fatal consequence. Our hearts grow numb. We don't want apathy to guide our lives. Or do we? We don't want the force of habit to rule our life. Or do we? So we ought to ask ourselves, what can we do to keep our heart from growing numb, from becoming anesthetized? How do we make the joy of the gospel increase and take deeper root in our lives? And Jesus gives us the answer. He said to his disciples then, and he says it to us now, go forth, proclaim. The joy of the gospel is something to be experienced, something to be known and lived only through giving it away, through giving ourselves away. The spirit of the world tells us to be like everyone else, to settle for what comes easy. Faced with this human way of thinking, we must regain the conviction that we need one another, that we have a shared responsibility for others and for the world. It is the responsibility to proclaim the message of Jesus. For the source of our joy is an endless desire to show mercy, the fruit of our own experience of the power of the Father's infinite mercy. Go out to all. Proclaim by anointing, and anoint by proclaiming. This is what the Lord tells us today. He tells us a Christian finds joy in mission. Go out to people of every nation. A Christian experiences joy in following a command. Go forth and proclaim the good news. A Christian finds ever new joy in answering a call. Go forth and anoint. Jesus sends his disciples out to all nations, to every people. We too were part of all those people of 2,000 years ago. Jesus did not provide a short list of who is or who is not worthy of receiving his message, his presence. Instead, he always embraced life as he saw it, in faces of pain, hunger, sickness, and sin, in faces of wounds, of thirst, of weariness, doubt, and pity. Far from expecting a pretty life, smartly dressed and neatly groomed, he embraced life as he found it. It made no difference whether it was dirty, unkempt, or broken. Jesus said, go out and tell the good news to everyone. Go out and in my name embrace life as it is and not as you think it should be. Go out to the highways and byways. Go out to tell the good news fearlessly, without prejudice, without superiority, without condescension, to all those who have lost the joy of living. Go out to proclaim the merciful embrace of the Father. Go out to those who are burned by pain and failure, who feel that their lives are empty, and proclaim the folly of a loving Father who wants to anoint them with the oil of hope, the oil of salvation. Go out to proclaim the good news that error, deceitful illusions, and falsehoods do not have the last word in a person's life. Go out with the ointment which soothes wounds and heals hearts. Mission is never the fruit of a perfectly planned program or a well-organized manual. Mission is always the fruit of a life which knows what it is to be found and healed, encountered and forgiven. Mission is born of a constant expression of God's merciful anointing. The Church, the holy people of God, treads the dust-laden paths of history, so often traversed by conflict, injustice, and violence, in order to encounter her children, our brothers and sisters. The holy and faithful people of God are not afraid of losing their way. They are afraid of becoming self-enclosed, frozen into elites, clinging to their own security. They know that self-enclosure in all of the many forms it takes is the cause of so much apathy. So, let us go out. Let us go forth to offer everyone the life of Jesus Christ. The people of God can embrace everyone because we are the disciples of the one who knelt before his own to wash their feet. The reason we're here today is that many other people wanted to respond to that call. They believe that life grows by giving away, and it weakens in isolation and comfort. We are heirs to the bold missionary spirit of so many men and women who preferred not to be shut up within structures which give us a false sense of security, within habits which make us feel safe, while at our door people are starving. We are indebted to a tradition, a chain of witnesses who have made it possible for the good news of the gospel to be, in every generation, both good and news. And today we remember one of those witnesses who testified to the joy of the gospel in these lands, Father Junipero Serra, He was the embodiment of a church which goes forth, a church which sets out to bring everywhere the reconciling tenderness of God. Junipo Serra left his native land and its way of life. He was excited about blazing trails, going forth to meet many people, learning and valuing the particular customs and ways of life. He learned how to bring to birth and nurture God's life in the faces of the native community, of everyone he met. Junipero sought to defend the dignity of the native community, to protect it from those who had mistreated and abused it. Mistreatment and wrongs which today still trouble us, especially because of the hurt which they cause in the lives of many people. Father Serra had a motto which inspired his life and work, a saying he lived his life by. Siempre adelante. Keep moving forward. For him, thus, this was the way to continue experiencing the joy of the gospel, to keep his heart from going numb, from being anesthetized. He kept moving forward because the Lord was waiting. He kept going because his brothers and sisters were waiting. He kept going forward to the end of his life. Today, like him, may we always be able to say, forward, let's keep moving forward.
It's an opportunity for the journalist to literally get up close with this figure, the head of the Catholic Church. And after this, from what I understand, he'll be taking an American Airlines flight as he travels domestically here in the U.S.
Yeah. And we actually have Bill Plant, who's standing by. He's in Washington. I can't imagine what the situation is like in Washington in terms of security. Bill, how does it look in D.C. right about now?
Well, you know, it was surprising. A lot of people apparently took these security warnings to heart and stayed home because traffic this morning was very light, whereas tomorrow is the day that it's really, really going to be tight. Security around the White House today appears normal. Tomorrow, however, they're going to have it barricaded off from, about 5 o'clock on. And those of us who are going to be here to cover it have to be here no later than about 7. So it'll be quite a morning here. They're expecting as many as 20,000 people on the White House South Lawn for the welcoming ceremony.
I know in Philadelphia, they've already asked people to remove their cars. In fact, they're towing cars out of the Center City area. They started doing that yesterday. You said people seem to be complying with the security concerns. Are they asking people to sort of go above and beyond to remove their cars from the streets or anything along those lines?
No, we haven't heard that yet, but we have been warned that there will be substantial street closures, particularly in the area of the White House and in the area on Thursday of the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception, where the Pope will celebrate an outdoor Mass. So it is going to be difficult, predictably, getting around, kind of like having a presidential inauguration.
Just for our viewers who saw that image a moment ago, a tight shot of those two flags. On your right, you saw the official Vatican flag. On your left, the flag of Cuba. We are told that our own Alan Pizia is on board the plane. We're efforting the opportunity to talk to him. But certainly, this is a moment that for world leaders, Bill, as you well know, for the President of the United States, this is an opportunity to highlight things that are very much in line with the Catholic Church's views, climate change, certainly helping the poor. These are the kinds of values that we have heard Pope Francis emphasize. But there are areas, Bill, that we know the Pope diverges from when it comes to the Obama administration and some of its positions. What can we expect out of that meeting when the Pope meets with President Obama?
Vatican officials who have briefed the press about what the Pope is expected to say take pains to point out that he won't be overtly political. But, of course, he does oppose abortion. He does oppose...
Stand by, Bill. I'm so sorry. Let's go to our Alan Pizzi, who is on the plane right now. Alan, what can you tell us?
Well, we're taxiing at Santiago de Cuba right now, heading for Washington, D.C. What's happening right now is the Pope is arguing about an embargo, but we've just solved that issue. The Pope held Mass this morning at the most holy shrine in Cuba, and among the things he said, he called on Cubans to have... Sorry.
Alan, can you see the Pope from your seat? I'm just curious. Can you see the Pope from where you're sitting? Is he
no,
just...
I cannot. I cannot see the Pope. We're way back in economy class, and the Pope is right up in I think seat 1A. They have flatbeds in first class in Alitalia, and that's where he is. He had a ceremony. Usual departure ceremony. Not that many people there. It's very controlled here in Cuba, but lots of cheerful waving and lots of music. When he gave Mass at the holiest shrine in Cuba this morning, he said that he wanted a church that goes forth to build bridges, to break down walls, to sow seeds of reconciliation. That's been one of his themes throughout the trip in Cuba that he wanted to push for. He's pushing for more church involvement. The Cubans are not fighting that. The interesting thing is that the Cubans desperately want the embargo lifted, and that's sort of the next item on the agenda, if you will, when he comes to the United States. We're not clear at this stage whether or not he will actually speak directly about the embargo. The papal spokesman, Father Federico Lombardi, said it's more likely the Pope would talk about what he calls the process, meaning the normalization of relations between the United States and Cuba. But with this Pope, we're always told expect the unexpected. We definitely have to listen to all his speeches because he changes delivery, so he could change his mind on that. But he has a full program. Starting tomorrow, today when we land at Andrews Air Force Base, he'll be met by President Obama and others, but there'll be no real formal thing going on, no big public events of any kind. The real trip starts tomorrow with the official welcome on the south lawn of the White House and then goes on.
I'm wondering... Sorry, Alan. I'm wondering, on previous trips, the Pope has been sort of pretty casual with the media. At times he's come back to talk to the members of the media on the plane. What's it been like on this trip? Has he interacted at all with you?
On the way out on a trip, he comes along and speaks, shakes our hand individually. On this, since we're leaving Cuba, since it's back and big left, he will conduct a press conference. We have to table is how long we will and how many questions we can have. Then it's divided up among the language groups, and then we ask questions. And what's been going on in the flight before I came on here with you is that we, the press, have been fighting among ourselves about. We agreed on the question. However, the big fight was about an embargo. Obviously, the Europeans would like, and some of the print people would like an hour embargo after he gets off the plane. Those of us who are broadcasters are saying that's not going to happen. We put it to a vote, and there will be no embargo. So it's the kind of nonsense that goes on with us because we all know that the Pope is going to say something that's going to be newsworthy, and we want to be able to get it out on the air as fast as we can.
Absolutely. And Alan, it's so great to have that inside view on board the Pope's plane as he makes his way from Cuba to the United States. I can hear our connection is fading just a bit, but Alan, we appreciate your insights, and we look forward to hearing about whether or not the Pope makes it back to the back of the plane during this leg of the trip. But we certainly appreciate your insight.
Well, I'm looking forward to it as much as you are, so I'll let you know as soon as I can.
Francisco! Francisco!
Good morning. Mr. President, I'm deeply grateful for your welcome in the name of the all Americans. As the son of an immigrant family, I'm happy to be a guest in this country, which was largely built by such families. I look forward to these days of encounter and dialogue, in which I hope to listen to and share many of the hopes and dreams of the American people. During my visit, I will have the honor of addressing Congress, where I hope, as a brother of this country, to offer words of encouragement to those called to guide the nation's political future in fidelity to its founding principles. I will also travel to Philadelphia for the 8th World Meeting of Families to celebrate and support the institutions of marriage and the family at this critical moment in the history of our civilization. Mr. President, together with their fellow citizens, American Catholics are committed to building a society which is truly tolerant and inclusive, to safeguarding the rights of individuals and communities, and to rejecting every form of injustice, discrimination. With countless other people of goodwill, they are likewise concerned that efforts to build a just and wisely ordered society respect their deepest concerns and the right to religious liberty. That freedom remains one of America's most precious possessions. And as my brothers, the United States bishops, have reminded us, all are called to be vigilant precisely as good citizens to preserve and defend that freedom from everything that would threaten or compromise it. Mr. President, I find it encouraging that you are proposing an initiative for reducing air pollution. Accepting the urgency, it seems clear to me also that climate change is a problem we can no longer be left to a future generation. When it comes to the care of our common home, we are living at a critical moment of history. We still have time to make the change needed to bring about a sustainable and integral development, for we know that things can change. Such change demands on our part a serious and responsible recognition not only of the kind of the world we may be leaving to our children, but also to the millions of people living under a system which has overlooked them. Our common home has been part of this group of the excluded, which cries out to heaven and which today powerfully strikes our homes, our cities, our societies. To use a telling phrase of the Reverend Martin Luther King, we can say that we have defaulted on a promissory note, and now is the time to honor it. We know by faith that the Creator does not abandon us. He never forsakes His loving plan or repents of having created us. Humanity has the ability to work together in building our common home. As Christians, inspired by this certainty, we wish to commit ourselves to the conscious and responsible care of our common home. Mr. President, the efforts which were recently made to mend broken relationships and to open new doors to cooperation within our human family represent positive steps along the path of reconciliation, justice, and freedom. I would like all men and women of goodwill in this great nation to support the efforts of the international community to protect the vulnerable in our world and to stimulate integral and inclusive models of development. So that our brothers and sisters everywhere may know the blessings of peace and prosperity which God wills for all His children. Mr. President, once again, I thank you for your welcome. And I look forward to these days, your country. God bless America.
Pope Francis in English, blessing America, God bless America. Thanking the President for his welcome.
It's a busy first full day here in the U.S. for Pope Francis. You see his arrival outside Washington there, being greeted by President Obama, his family, and hundreds of others. This morning, Francis receives a formal welcome at the White House in the afternoon. He'll say a mass at which the founder of California's mission will be made a saint. Tomorrow, Francis will become the first pope to address Congress.
The president of China has also arrived in the U.S. President Xi Jinping said China is ready to set up a joint effort with the United States to fight cyber crimes. President Xi's first stop is in Seattle, where he also announced an agreement with the U.S. to advance renewable energy. Still, tensions remain as he prepares to be hosted by President Obama at a state dinner on Friday night.
But American politics in an awkward light. Another government shutdown looming, this time over funding for Planned Parenthood. Conservative Republicans want the funding cut over a series of videos which purport to show Planned Parenthood illegally trafficked fetal tissue. Presidential candidate Ted Cruz among those leading the GOP charge. Leading lawmakers have been meeting behind closed doors trying to work out a compromise.
On a glorious sun-dappled morning at the White House, thousands gathered across the broad lawn. The president's cabinet, the honor guard marching in, the troops bearing the colors. It was the grandest of American pageantry. Then the trumpets blared and the motorcade arrived, the Pope's little Fiat bringing all that grandeur a bit back down to earth. Every arm aloft, taking pictures. The two men stood together for the national anthems, a striking 21st century image. This first Pope from the Americas and first African-American president who praised Francis as a force for change in the world and an ally, especially on the environment.
Holy Father, you remind us that we have a sacred obligation to protect our planet, God's magnificent gift to us.
And then Francis spoke.
Good morning.
In English, carefully, but with utter calm clarity.
As the son of an immigrant family, I'm happy to be a guest in this country, which was largely built by such families.
Defying critics on the right, he called for action on climate change.
That climate change is a problem we can no longer be left to a future generation.
This man's humility in power somehow enhances his impact on people.
We love you, Pope Francis!
They walked to the Oval Office for their private meeting.
I noticed all of you are much better behaved than usual.
And then the Pope was off into the Pope-mobile and onto the streets of Washington.
And Terry Moran with us now. And Terry, you were telling me that the Pope delivered his bishops a message saying, be humble.
And humility, David, will come easier to some bishops than others. He also, however, on a serious note, said we will not repeat the crime of sex abuse. Very stern on that.
There's another late-breaking headline involving members of the Supreme Court tonight, the justices who will not be attending this historic joint meeting of Congress.
That's right. Some will, some won't. Among those who won't, conservative Catholics, Justice Scalia, Justice Alito, and Justice Thomas. They don't say why, but it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and they're Catholic, all three of them.
Absolutely.
All right, Terry Moran with us. We're envious of your travels with the Pope. Terry, thank you.
Deus in adiutorium meum intende. Gloria Patri et Filio et Spiritui Sancto. La ferita del
I know how much the wounds of these last few years have weighed on your spirit, and I have joined my efforts to yours in the efforts of succoring those victims. And when we bring succor, then the victims are healed, and we have to hope that such crimes will never repeat themselves. I follow closely the immense efforts you have made to welcome and integrate immigrants who continue to look to America, like so many others before them, in the hope of enjoying its blessing of freedom and prosperity.
E prosperità.
I am certain that once again, these people will enrich America and its church. May God bless you and Our Lady watch over you. Thank you.
Y hoy recordamos a uno de esos testigos que supo testimoniar en estas tierras la alegría del Evangelio, Fray Junípero Serra. Supo vivir lo que es la iglesia en salida, esta iglesia que sabe salir e ir por los caminos para compartir la ternura reconciliadora de Dios. Supo dejar su tierra, sus costumbres, se animó a abrir caminos, supo salir al encuentro de tantos, aprendiendo a respetar sus costumbres y peculiaridades. Aprendió a gestar y a acompañar la vida de Dios en los rostros de los que iba encontrando, haciéndolos sus hermanos. Junípero buscó defender la dignidad de la comunidad nativa, protegiéndola de cuantos la habían abusado, abusos que hoy nos siguen provocando desagrado, especialmente por el dolor que causan en la vida de tantos.
This trip poses a massive security challenge, security being beefed up in the 3 cities the Pope will visit. Bomb-sniffing dogs outside the United Nations right there in New York City. In Philadelphia, the city maps on surveillance cameras. And here in Washington, areas closed down in the shadow of the Capitol. ABC senior justice correspondent Pierre Thomas now on all the points bulletin that went out from police in those 3 cities. Pierre?
That's right, David. There's never been a security operation this size to protect one man on U.S. soil. What makes this challenge unique is that this pope is unpredictable, as we saw in Cuba, a man nearly making his way to the pontiff, security ripping him away. While there's no specific plot, police in Washington, New York, and Philadelphia have done an assessment looking at who might want to attack the pope. It ranges from ISIS to mafia and, of course, lone wolves who could come out of nowhere. David?
Pierre Thomas with us live in Washington as well. Pierre, thanks to you.
We just saw the Pope being introduced to the President by Ambassador Peter Selfridge, Chief of Protocol. Now moving to the front row of the U.S. refuge.
Welcome back to CBS, and this was such a momentous occasion, Meg. We saw Pope Francis deliver his remarks in English. The 78-year-old pontiff essentially learning English before his visit to the United States, said he wasn't very strong. We were listening to it, sounded better than, my mom's been in this country 45 years, and I don't think she sounds as good as the Pope does.
One of his first lines was that he is a son of an immigrant family, and embracing America and the immigrants that make up this country. A gorgeous day in Washington, D.C. Right now, the Pope is with the president in the Oval Office, and we are waiting for them to walk out here because, as we all know, this is a Pope that likes to get close to the people, and he's going to be coming out. There were tens of thousands of people who showed up on the South Lawn to listen to his speech, a lot of pomp and circumstance surrounding this, and now they're going to get the chance, possibly shake hands with
That's
him.
right. And this is a Pope who, in those remarks that he delivered there at the White House, touched upon a number of issues that are facing not just the American people, but also our planet, and specifically the misuse, the abuse of the planet. At one point, he said, we still have time to make the changes needed to bring about a sustainable and integral development, for we know that things can change. And he also went on to say that such change demands on our part a serious and responsible recognition, not only of the kind of world we're leaving to our children, but also to the millions of people living under a system which has overlooked them. And I think it's interesting that in that same phrase, not only talking about climate change, but also talking about the system of inequality that exists not only here in this country where the gap between the rich and the poor is growing, but certainly around the world.
Right, and we're looking at a live picture right there where we were. Right now, this is where he was greeted by the president and the first lady. And as you mentioned, Vlad, talking about taking on hot topics such as climate change, this is not the typical script that you hear from a pope. You typically hear about abortion or the traditional family, but here he's talking about immigrants, climate change, global income inequality, and he's really taking on a different way as he goes through his visit here in America. As we watch and wait to see the Pope again, we're joined by our professor of theology from Notre Dame, Canada Moss, who's had a front row seat watching this special coverage. So what did you take away from his speech?
I thought it was both an incredibly warm speech given from the heart, but also a very intelligent speech. You know, he used the language that appeals to Americans. He talked about solidarity. He's the son of an immigrant. We're a brother nation. And then he referred to the founding fathers and Martin Luther King. And this is not something you normally see from the Pope. This is a kind of language and idea that appeals to us, that we're familiar with. So I thought it was incredibly warm. I was surprised to see the environment up front and center.
Up front. Very first thing he sort of touched upon, other than the fact that he's the son of an immigrant, of immigrants. And he went on to point, which I think is hugely important to the American public, that this country was built by immigrants. I thought that was very powerful.
That's right. And he's going to use that to make his arguments that we need to create a country that's more open to immigrants. So it is very intelligently done. We can also see him answering some of his critics here. So he's been accused by some conservatives of having bad priorities and that he shouldn't put the environment first. And we can see him responding to that when he says that it's urgent and that we cannot leave this to a future generation.
You know what I also thought was interesting, Canada, and you touched upon it, is that a lot of people have expected that this Pope will be a liberal Pope, but he's not really going to be liberal when it comes to the issues that are important to the Catholic faith, which are same-sex marriage, for example. But I thought that by using the environment, and he also pointed out that it's not for future generations. He wants it now. When he talked about Martin Luther King, he talked about the promissory note that Martin Luther King talked about. And that was at Martin Luther King's Jr. speech to the White House. He was at the White House in August of 1963. The famous I Have a Dream speech. He talked about the founding fathers in this promissory note, the pontiff saying that we have defaulted on that promissory note.
That's right. He really is talking about urgency, and that is what he's been criticized for. I think it's also important to note, though, that he does touch on the hot-button issue of religious freedom in America, and he refers to the United States bishops. He uses, again, language that appeals to us, as in we should act as good citizens, he says, which is language that we embrace. But this is a veiled gesture to the HHS mandate and to the issue of same-sex marriage in America.
Well, he did talk about family, but not in the traditional sense from another pope might have. How did he touch on it in a way that shows support for gay marriage?
Well, he does use language of inclusivity, and that's language that is both biblical, but it's language that also appeals to liberals, you know, inclusive, embracing, and that is Francis's message. You know, Francis is someone who walks in the footsteps of Jesus, someone who cares for everyone, who's not about closing doors, he's about opening them.
Yeah, and in fact, we have, if you missed it, the Pope delivering those remarks at the White House. We have a little bit of that sound when he talks about how important it is to save our planet. Listen.
Climate change is a problem we can no longer be left to a future generation. When it comes to the care of our common home, we are living at a critical moment of history. We still have time to make the change needed to bring about a sustainable and integral development, for we know that things can change.
And joining us at the desk now as we take some live look at the right outside the White House now is Monsignor Thomas Figueiredo. We were just listening to the Pope tackle right off the top climate change. What did you make of his speech?
I thought it was a fascinating speech. He touched on four main areas, I would say, in a particular order. Family, the question of religious liberty. Thirdly, climate change. And fourthly, peace. In terms of climate change, it is very interesting. It is a religious message, actually, because we believe that creation was given to us by God and we encounter God in creation. And so we have a duty to protect that creation in order that we can find God, who is love. I mean, when we see something beautiful, it raises our minds to the one who created what is beauty.
Monsignor, I thought it was amazing that the pontiff opened up his remarks by talking about the fact that he is the son of immigrants, and he turned it back to the U.S. saying, and he feels great to be here because this country was a nation that was built by immigrants. That is something that I think a lot of people, when we talk about the pontiff's visit here to the United States, there are a number of issues, not only climate change that he has seen himself align with President Obama, the issue of immigration. On the flight from Santiago, Cuba to D.C. yesterday, he gave remarks to some reporters, and he talked about how he had intended to come into the United States via Mexico. And you're looking at, are these live pictures? Okay, this is from earlier when the Pope was leaving the Vatican embassy there, and he waded out into the crowd, right into it, and started shaking hands with people, blessing the crowd, kissing the children. In fact, one man actually kissed the pontiff, and you could see the Secret Service sort of try to jump in there, but he clearly comes alive in these moments.
And we also saw, you know, what's really different here as you look at these pictures, all the cell phones and the pictures, and the president had mentioned that he is on Twitter too. How different is it in the social media world during his visit for him to get his message out? Is it a little bit easier, Candida?
It's certainly easier now we live in the world of Twitter. And in fact, the Pope's social media is going to be handled while he's here by the same company that handles the NFL and Shaquille O'Neal. So this is well managed. What you notice when you look at the pictures is that people don't just want to touch him. Now they want the selfies. So it's sort of like this two-pronged thing now.
All right, we are joined by our foreign correspondent, Alan Pizzi, who's on the south lawn of the White House. He had a front row seat there. Alan, just tell us, what is it like there?
I have to say right off the top that I was very, very impressed. I've been to a lot of papal welcoming ceremonies, and this one is at the top of my list. It's not only the impressive venue, but just the way everything was carried out. What really struck me, though, was the Pope's speech. I've listened to a lot of them. He made this in English, and he didn't deviate more than about one word in the whole thing, mostly because he can't. But he hit all the notes that he wants to hit on this trip in this speech. He started off by saying that as the son of an immigrant family, I'm happy to be a guest in this country. And one of his points was pushing for better receptions for immigrants, if you will. He had originally planned to enter the United States like an immigrant across the Mexican border. For logistical reasons, that wasn't possible. But he did hit that note. And then he talked about guiding the nation's political future in fidelity to its founding principles. He spoke about how he was going to the 8th World Meeting of Families in Philadelphia later in the week to celebrate and support the institutions of marriage and the family. So if you look at the opening two paragraphs, the first paragraph would no doubt please the more liberal wing of the establishment here, and the next one plays right into a lot of Republican stances. And then he went on to talk about safeguarding religious freedom, which he said is of course one of the founding principles of the United States. And then he talked about the issue that's going to be the big hot button one, I think. He talked about climate change, he said, and he went fully out on the side of President Obama, saying, quote, I find it encouraging that you are proposing an initiative for reducing air pollution. And he said that he made the point that climate change can no longer be left to future generations. And then as one of the wags in the press corps said, he touched on America's non-religious saint Martin Luther King by quoting using a phrase from Reverend King that we can say that we have defaulted on a promissory note, and now is the time to honor it. That's in reference to fixing up climate change. He then also spoke about mending broken relationships and opening new doors, which is a direct reference to the new rapprochement between Havana and Washington. And he said, I would like all men and women of goodwill in this great nation to support the efforts of the international community to protect the vulnerable in our world and to stimulate integral and inclusive that's the page you were to see what the quote was, models of development. I took that as a reference to helping migrants and also pushing more money into the developing world. And I think that those are the main points that he wants to hit on. Interestingly, President Obama echoed some of those, and President Obama used the word mercy a couple of times, and that's the theme of this papal trip, missionary of mercy. So I think we found a great meeting of the minds on that podium this morning, and I think that the Pope has set the tone for the way his visit's going to go. He's not going to back off from making the points he wants to make, but he does it in that very Franciscan, if you will, way, Francis way of nudging, and that's what we heard this morning.
Our foreign correspondent, Alan Pizzi, who is on the South Lawn of the White House, who witnessed it all live there in person. Alan, thank you very, very much for that insight. We appreciate it. We're back here in our studio with Candida Moss, who is our papal contributor here, and Monsignor Figueroa. Thank you again both for being here. I want to ask you about, we've been talking about this for the last few minutes, about climate change. What's interesting is in that Laudato Si that the Pope released back in June, he says, though, there's some temperance there. He says that the planet is being destroyed primarily because of our reckless pursuit of profits. Now, whilst a lot of people may want to save the planet, that phrase there itself probably will anger some in this country who see perhaps that is not the function of a pope or the planet. Before we get to that, let's see here. We have President Obama and Pope Francis walking down the colonnade there at the White House. The president pointing out the beautiful rose garden.
It really is a special moment here because this is really where the Pope shines. He wants to get out. He wants to talk to people. That was his desire to coming to America, talking to people, shaking their hands. We saw some of those unscripted moments happen in Cuba when the one person really wanted to get to him. The security took him away, and he said, no, bring him back up. So, and I think that's really part of his charm, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. His willingness to reach out to people, his warmth, his love, the fact that he's willing to take risks with his own personal safety. This speaks to his genuine love of people. And that's something that people connect with and that makes them trust him.
And we see here, this is something that we've been remarking all morning long, that Pope Francis doesn't wear those red papal slippers, Monsignor.
No, really, I think that really
made by Prada. I know
that. That makes him an authentic person. He's often spoken that we need to be normal. And so that's what he wore in Buenos Aires. Why would he change his shoes coming to Rome?
Monsignor, do you think when you look at the timing of him and when he came in, I mean, he was trying to retire. He reached the age of 75. He said, you know, I'm ready. And we waited for a year, and then he was anointed Pope. How important is the timing? Do you think, in a way, after we saw the Catholic Church go through such a dark period, that he's almost saving Catholicism right now in this generation?
There's absolutely no doubt about that. That's why we believe as Christians, as Catholics, that it's the Holy Spirit who chooses the Pope. Pope Benedict, who had the humility to step down and give space to Pope Francis, who really believes that he has been elected for a period of time with a mission. He's a man with a mission, and in the short time that's left for him, however long that's going to be, he's going to accomplish what needs to be accomplished. Cleaning up in the church what needs to be cleaned up, giving the good news of the gospel, particularly to the weak, the suffering, the vulnerable, and truly being a shepherd who loves to be with his sheep. He often uses the term, we need to stay with the smell of our sheep. In fact, the cross he wears is a shepherd who is surrounded by sheep. Did you see those images this morning? He was surrounded by people, and that's what he really loves, and he's invigorated by that. You know, he's going to be with the homeless, he's going to be with the sick, he's going to be with immigrants. He's not out there for himself. he's going to be out there completely for the other. He's a great father. He's a great papa.
He is being seen by many, not just Catholics, but all people, as very transformative. This comes in the wake of Pope Benedict, who was quite ill at the end of his papacy before he resigned. I wonder, Canada, this Pope, when we first saw him appear after his election, I keep going back to that wonderful image when I think he probably surprised a lot of the Catholic faithful when he didn't appear in those red and gold ecumenical robes that we typically see a Pope appearing in. That sent a message from the very beginning that this was going to be a different kind of Pope.
That's exactly right. From the very beginning, we knew that there was something different about Pope Francis, and it was his humility, his willingness to be normal, to be like everyone else. And we saw that today when he pulled up in the Fiat. It was almost a humorous moment, this little Fiat dwarfed by his security detail.
It really was a contrast, wasn't it?
Yes.
But when you're on the papal platform, which is so huge, and you act with humility, that sends a real message to people. You know, the small Fiat holds up a mirror to our sort of culture of excess, and that's exactly what he wants to do.
And Monsignor, you said this to me yesterday as well, that culture of excess, in a way, has existed even in the church. For those of us who are Catholic, we see cardinals with their finery, and you know, there's a lot of gold, and you know, this seems to be a pullback from that.
It really is. He's going back to the authentic Christian message. He's going back to Jesus.
And has it changed what you're seeing in parishes?
There's absolutely no doubt about that.
More people?
More people and greater simplicity, particularly amongst those in the higher echelons of the church. Bishops, monsignors, priests. We're going out to the people. We're not waiting for them to come to us. That's key.
How is that helping the morale?
I think what I see, I work at a seminary training future priests, the numbers are skyrocketing.
Really?
With good men, good men. We all want to be like this Pope. We are enthused by him, and we want to give our lives for others like him.
There we see the picture of President Obama and the Pope from earlier this morning. And to that point, Father, this Pope is the first pontiff to acknowledge the very ugly allegations of the child abuse, the child sex scandals that have plagued the church for many, many years, appointing a tribunal of cardinals to look into the matter. By no means saying that it has gone away, but something that, that clearly needs to be addressed by the church. Canada, would you say?
I think there are really deep wounds left by the pedophilia crisis in the church. And, you know, while some people think that, you know, perhaps we should just move on, which would be wonderful, these are wounds that persist for people and are especially deep here in America. And I hope what Pope Francis will recognize, especially by setting up a tribunal recently, is that this is the kind of wound that needs to be constantly tended to. It's not the kind of thing you can just sweep away.
Monsignor, do you think he would address celibacy then? Do you think that's something that he would take on?
He's certainly addressed it already. You know, celibacy is not a dogma. It's a matter. It's something that can change. I don't think he's going to change it, but he's certainly a man who understands openness, and he likes to listen and he likes to dialogue. That's his style. He wants to listen. He wants to dialogue. He wants to take into view everyone who's saying things, and if there has to be a change in the issue of celibacy, which in the Catholic Church we say is a matter of discipline, it helps us rather than a matter of dogma, I'm sure he'll move on it. Again, I don't think he is going to move on it, but he's certainly open, and I think that's a good thing.
Canada, to that point, there is an issue that some bishops have asked the Pope to look into, and others have said no, there should be no change in the dogma, which is that when it comes to couples who have divorced, and maybe you can explain this for our viewers. There are a group, I guess, of mostly German bishops who say, look, can you please look into this, Pope? And there's some Italians who say, no, this is the way it's always been. Can you talk to us a little bit about that schism and how Pope Francis perhaps might address it going forward?
Well, the issue in the Catholic Church is that when a couple marries, that's a sacrament, that's for life. So when they divorce, they need an annulment before they can remarry in the church. And this is obviously something that's very public. It's not the kind of thing that you could sort of get an annulment or get divorced on the sly. People know you have to go through this process. Now, this idea that marriage is for life, it goes back to the Bible, and a historian will tell you Jesus' statement that you cannot get divorced is actually one of the earliest statements he made. But it creates a practical problem. especially in our 21st century church, in that a lot of people are divorced and the annulment process is grueling. And so for a lot of people, they'd like to see what they see as sort of mercy on this issue, and that rather than having to get annulments, they could just be readmitted into the church after some period of reflection, or that perhaps the annulment process could be streamlined. And we have seen hints of that from the Pope. He recently did say that in straightforward cases of abuse or adultery, that an annulment could take place more quickly.
And that is clearly, it was interesting, at one point he married a group of people, and one of those that were married were a couple that had had a marriage annulled. They had already had children. And I think that that is in line, Monsignor, with the Pope's message, which is we for so long have been strictly adhering to dogma. We should, as he's been saying all along, have more mercy towards our brothers and sisters.
Yes, certainly. For example, on Holy Thursday now, when in the church we wash the feet of others in line with what Jesus did at the Last Supper, you know, that was traditionally just men. But now he goes into prisons and he washes the feet of men, he washes the feet of women, he even washed the feet of other people from other religions, a Muslim, last year. Again, on the issue of abortion, that's interesting. He hasn't changed the teaching on abortion, but there's going to be a year of mercy now where every priest knows he has the faculty to absolve from the sin of abortion. So he's not changing doctrine, teaching, but he's finding ways for others to come back to the church through mercy, through compassion, through understanding. Why should we be stuck in past ways if we cannot move forward?
You know, that is a great point, and the Pontiff talked about that in his remarks. We actually have the moment when he talked about mercy for those that are in need. Let's play that out.
American Catholics are committed to building a society which is truly tolerant and inclusive, to safeguarding the rights of individuals and communities, and to rejecting every form of injustice, discrimination.
And Monsignor, after the Year of Mercy is over, what is the goal? What is he hoping to accomplish?
I think he wants this to continue forever. Mercy is the strongest message that the Church can give and any priest can give, because it was at the heart of Jesus' message. And I need mercy more than anyone else, and when I receive it, I'm the happiest man in the world.
It's a beautiful statement. We are going to take a quick break. We're going to ask Candida and Monsignor to stick around because there's a lot more of this Pope coverage, but we're going to come out of the break with some other news that we've been following, including that Turing pharmaceutical CEO who has decided to reduce the price of drugs. Also, Hillary Clinton, new controversy with the emails. We're going to touch upon that with our Nancy Corder. Stick around.
All right, Ann, you certainly saw it in the crowds. We saw it in the streets. Extraordinary welcome for the Pope. He came face to face on these streets with the diversity of America, people from all over the country who came to see him, to meet him, and if they were lucky, to be blessed by him. Many with stories rooted in faith and hope. And what they discovered was a Pope who seemed just as eager to meet them. NBC's Tom Costello spent his day in the crowds.
On a perfect sun-drenched day, Pope Francis emerged from the papal nunciature to the cheers of the faithful and the delight of Catholic school kids.
It was so really cool. Yeah, we got to touch him and stuff, and it was to shake his hand. It was really awesome. Yeah.
To those who'd risen early for this day, it was awesome. Francis blessed the crowd, even stopped to take selfies. This 16-year-old selfie quickly went viral.
It was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. It felt great. It was amazing.
But the Pope himself had a special request.
I will. I will. I promise. I promise. Every day.
Tens of thousands poured onto the streets of Washington, Francis riding down Constitution Avenue, smiling, waving, blessing the crowd. So many came with heart-wrenching stories of sadness and loss. The Dakers from Virginia lost their twin sons who'd been named after two previous popes. They came to get their daughter close to Francis.
It was a very joyful experience for the family.
Yes, tears of joy, absolutely. He's just amazing.
Of the many indelible images today, this one. 5-year-old Sophie Cruz broke through the lines and was scooped up by security, but Francis called for her to come close. A few words and a hug, and she handed him a T-shirt with this letter. Her parents are undocumented workers from Mexico who traveled from Los Angeles. She had rehearsed her message to the Pope: please protect my parents.
Legalizing my parents, because every day I am scared that one day they will take them away from me.
Her proud father relishing her moment with Papa Francisco. A day of special moments and memories. Tom Costello, NBC News, Washington.
I think that it's a good thing for our country. I think we need hope, and maybe he will impart that. I think we've lost our civility in this country. I think it's a wake-up call, and I think we need a wake-up call.
It's definitely positive because it's showing that he is of the people, which is what the Catholic Church is about, and for the people by the way he dresses and everything. So he's with us.
It's not like he's changing the church doctrine, but just focusing on something different, which I think Americans are ready to hear, and people in a lot of, because it's not completely political to say, oh, we should take care of the environment. I mean, it's not like, I don't think he was saying, let's support cap and trade or a carbon tax. You know, he's not getting into that level of detail because that's not his job, but just kind of in general supporting things and, you know, also talking about poverty and things like that. So.
And I feel that it's important that the church has a leader that is willing to take on those topics and to speak from his heart. And whether you agree with him or not, I think the conversation is the beginning of understanding and reaching some kind of common ground.
Jeff Begage joins us now from Washington. Jeff, the Pope plans to visit the Basilica right where you are. Can you tell us about the security preparations there?
Well, anybody who gets in here has to have a ticket. There are going to be about 25,000 people for this open mass on Wednesday. At least that's what they're expecting here. So anyone coming in to this perimeter, and they have a perimeter set up with fences, you have to have a ticket, and they're going to be screened. So there are security precautions in place, and what you're seeing here is what you will see in the other two cities, New York and Philadelphia. They will set up these perimeters around these events. That way they can screen who's coming in and out.
Jeff, we know that security officials in Washington are used to dealing with inaugurations, other big events. How does this compare?
Well, listen, they've given this Pope visit a special designation that puts it on par with an inauguration or a Super Bowl. But keep in mind, this is a much bigger event than that in a lot of ways, because you're looking at this Pope visit from a perspective of this is a visit that will be over 5 days in 3 different cities. And in some of those cities, like New York, for example, you're going to have so many other things going on. So this is a special, unique type of security challenge for law enforcement. And that's why they've given it this special designation that sort of raises the bar and allows law enforcement, not only federal, but also local and state. They will all coordinate with this event. And they have to, because this is the type of event that will stretch their resources.
You know, the thing about this Pope is that he likes to get into the crowd. He likes to get in there and touch people and kiss babies and shake hands. What is the plan if the Pope decides to, you know, diverge a little bit and get right in there with the crowd?
Well, you said it. This is a Pope who is known for going off script, if you will. He likes to mingle, and that's why there has been a lot of preparation that has gone into this visit. In fact, the Secret Service has sent a detail to the Vatican to observe his movements. And so there is a fine balance that law enforcement, his security here in the U.S. will have to abide by, if you will, as they protect him, because as you said, he likes to mingle, he likes to go off script and interact with the faithful, and that's what they expect to happen here during his 5-day visit.
All right, Jeff Begage in Washington, D.C.